Olá, eu sou o Rui Brandão, médico e CEO do Zen Club. E estamos juntos com o Exame no Summit de Saúde Mental nas Organizações, porque democratizar o acesso à saúde emocional é nossa missão. Desde 2016, ajudamos empresas a definir e implementar as suas estratégias de saúde mental. Nossa solução corporativa já é usada por mais de 200 empresas, como Natura, Ambev ou Votorantim, que têm à sua disposição uma rede de mais de 500 profissionais de saúde mental 24/7, programas de treinamento socioemocional e mapeamento do comportamento dos seus times. A OMS já previa que em 2020 as doenças mentais seriam as doenças mais incapacitantes do mercado de trabalho. Com a pandemia, tudo isso se acelerou. É oficial. Saúde mental deixou de ser um luxo ou um tabu dentro das organizações e passou a ser uma pauta central, com outros temas como sustentabilidade, inclusão e diversidade. O importante é começar. Com o Zen Club você consegue implementar e iniciar a sua estratégia de saúde emocional, sensibilizando lideranças, engajando os seus times e conseguindo medir os seus resultados. Saúde mental não deve ser visto como um tema reativo a um problema. Ter uma estratégia sólida e proativa de saúde emocional é a base para você ter pessoas engajadas, times motivados e uma cultura fortalecida. Não tenha medo de endereçar este tema e lhe garanto que, além do impacto positivo nos seus resultados de negócio, os seus colaboradores e clientes se conectarão ainda mais com a sua marca. Vamos juntos?
A Bradesco Saúde desenvolveu uma série de iniciativas que promovem orientação e cuidado em meio à pandemia de Covid-19. É o Saúde Digital. Com ele, quem tem Bradesco Saúde pode realizar consultas médicas por videochamada sem sair de casa. Veja como funciona. Para dúvidas e sintomas de Covid-19 ou outras questões de saúde, você deverá acessar o app Bradesco Saúde. Se você ainda não tem instalado, faça o download gratuito na App Store ou no Google Play. Para consultas médicas regulares com médicos referenciados, acesse o site bradescosaude.com.br. Confira as especialidades disponíveis para atendimento por videochamada e como agendar sua consulta. Bradesco Saúde, ao seu lado contra o coronavírus.
Muito bom dia a todos. Estamos no terceiro dia do nosso Summit de Saúde Mental nas Organizações. Meu nome é Cíntia Gonçalves, eu sou cofundadora da Get Ahead com Toya Lort. A Get Ahead se propõe a desenvolver estratégias e programas de saúde mental para as organizações e, em conjunto com um time incrível, Companhia de Talentos, Hospital Albert Einstein e a Exame, nós desenhamos e estamos aí aproveitando todo o conteúdo incrível que esse fórum está gerando e todas as conversas que estão acontecendo nesses dias. No painel de ontem à noite, com Paulo Kakenoff, da Gol, Ana Bogos e Dr. Elisier, foi discutido muito a importância da conversa, né? A importância de falar sobre saúde mental dentro do nosso ambiente de trabalho. E é sobre esse tema que a gente vai tratar hoje aqui. Esse é uma questão fundamental quando pensamos na saúde mental. Tem dados importantes de uma pesquisa que eu vou contar aqui para vocês, de Londres, e que, comparado ao nosso cenário no Brasil, com certeza é ainda mais positivo. Nós temos aqui um estudo feito pela doutora Sarah Evans, pela pesquisadora Sarah Evans, que esteve com a gente também ontem, e esses dados dizem que 70% dos colaboradores evitam falar do tema saúde mental no ambiente de trabalho. Que, por outro lado, 85% dos gestores se sentem responsáveis pela saúde mental de seus colaboradores, mas somente 1/3 deles se sente preparado para abordar e tratar o tema, né? Isso nós estamos falando de uma realidade que está passos ainda à frente do caminho que nós temos que fazer aqui no Brasil em relação a esse tema. Esse painel, com certeza, vai ser incrível e vai trazer aí muita luz para esse assunto. Vou chamar, então, agora a Toya Lorte e nossos painelistas. Muito obrigada.
Bom, obrigada, Cíntia. Bom dia. Meu nome é Toya Lorte, eu sou fundadora da Get Ahead, junto com a Cíntia. E para as pessoas que me conhecem, devem saber que eu passei uma noite praticamente igual uma criança na véspera do Natal. Eu mal dormi para acordar e ver a árvore toda iluminada e com os presentes embaixo. É assim que eu me sinto hoje, acordando e podendo, né, dar as boas-vindas aos panelistas. Então, se puder, bem-vindos Thomas, Caroline e Claire. Thomas, Claire e Caroline, além de serem meus colegas, também viraram amigos, porque fazem parte de uma comunidade com quem eu me relaciono lá fora, basicamente por meio do INSEAD e por meio do Cats de Vries Institute, que a Claire vai contar para vocês um pouco o que eles fazem. E a minha relação com o trabalho do Cats de Vries Institute e do INSEAD já vem de alguns anos. O primeiro contato que eu tive com esse tipo de abordagem, que é uma abordagem de entendimento sistêmico das organizações, foi em 1998, quando um livro caiu na minha mão que chama A Organização Neurótica. Um livro escrito no começo dos anos 80 e que foi fundamental para toda a minha formação e como eu entendo a questão de desenvolvimento organizacional e de liderança. Então, para apresentar, a Claire é Head no Cats de Vries Institute, responsável por desenvolver programas internacionais, e ela também faz coaching de alguns dos programas do Cats de Vries Institute. Thomas é professor do INSEAD, tem uma história muito interessante. Thomas, talvez seria bacana você contar um pouco também. Ontem a gente teve também um médico que trabalhava em UTI, que migrou para a carreira de gestão, então bastante interessante também. Caroline Rook, que também é professora na Handley Business School, que é uma escola de referência em negócios na Inglaterra e também mundial. E para quem sabe, me conhece, além de ter praticamente dormido ao lado da árvore de Natal, né, que na verdade é o meu laptop hoje, eu gosto muito de uma abordagem séria, estruturada, bem fundamentada. Então, hoje o formato vai ser um pouco diferente dos painéis anteriores, que foram mais um bate-papo, uma conversa, mas a gente recebeu vários pedidos quando a gente estava desenhando o Summit para também trazer algumas ferramentas, algo que as pessoas pudessem já utilizar no seu dia a dia. Então, por isso que hoje a gente os convidou para trazer uma ferramenta que chama Apca. É com vocês. Welcome.
Muito obrigado, Toya.
Thank you very much, Toya. Yeah. I really must improve my Portuguese.
No, don't worry.
Well, thank you, Toya and Cynthia, for inviting us to join this summit from the Ketz de Vries Institute. We're really delighted to be here. We share a goal with you, Toya, and with Way Ahead to create healthy, performing organizations where people can feel and be at their best. I have a very fond memory, Toya. I remember you and I were at a summit similar to this a couple of years ago in the UK. And we met up at the end of the day to catch up on what we'd seen and heard. And we shared our passions and dreams about how we could bring the subject of mental health to organizations and to leaders so that they could make a difference to take care of themselves and their teams. And we talked and talked until they were sweeping around our feet and switching off the lights, and they threw us out of the venue. So it's really great to be here today where you're running a similar summit for this audience in Brazil. So Toya already introduced me a little bit. My name's Claire Finch. I call in today from the UK. There's certainly many downsides of working virtually, but a silver lining and upside for me is that we're able to be with you today from the other side of the world. Maybe just to start, to mention a few things about the COVID pandemic. It certainly turned our lives upside down, both professionally and personally. And these past months have been hugely disruptive and emotional for us all. At KDVI, we work with leaders across the globe, looking at how we can make organizations better places to be. And we've seen that trends that were already happening have just accelerated during this pandemic. And when we speak to leaders, what we hear is that there are three emerging critical capabilities that leaders need to have within their organizations. The first is really understanding how the crisis has impacted culture and the people within the organization. The second is how can we cultivate more resilience? And the third is how do we support mental health and well-being? And that's our focus here today, of course, with Caroline and Thomas, who already have been introduced so beautifully by Toya. So the focus of this session will be on understanding the impact of stress on both ourselves and on our teams. How can we identify and address the first signs of negative stress? And most importantly, how can we start conversations around this important topic? So I hand over now to Thomas and to Caroline.
Thank you very much, Claire. And it's a real pleasure to be talking to you all today. For me, it's a real treat and it's very special because I have family in Brazil. Meu marido é carioca. That's as far as it goes with my Brazilian Portuguese. And yes, Thomas and I want to introduce a tool to you today that would allow you to check in with yourself, where you're at in terms of your stress levels and how can you help yourself and others around you, people you work with, your teams, to turn unhealthy stress into healthy stress. And let me share some slides here so that you can see what we're talking to you about today. So, Thomas, I'll hand over to you for a moment to give us a little bit of context of our tool and why we're talking to you all today about stress.
Obrigado. Thank you very much, and I'm also delighted here to be with you. So we can't see you, but we can feel you through this new world, this new normal, as we're all spending lots of time in front of television screens or in front of our computer. So what we want to bring here in is a little bit, you might have heard that before. People are saying COVID is the new black swan. COVID is the new black swan. Now, what does that mean? Some of you know that the black swan is something that everything, it's a before and after, that we define, where it's saying like, nothing is as before. And I want to say something here to you, which is, for me, it took me quite some time to actually learn about that. I'm a medical doctor and I work in a hospital. I've been looking after COVID patient in the first lockdown when it came to France. But I still was in my mind convinced this is just like a crisis and it will go away. When the first lockdown was over, I was saying to myself, yeah, you see, it is, and it will be fine. We will be fine again. But all of us, we know, no matter where we are around the world, it's not yet over. It's not yet over. And what I want to show you here, what we want to show you here is a little bit, the message is pretty clear and simple. This is not a sprint, but a marathon. This is not a sprint, but a marathon. What you see here is a funny graph. And some people might say, like, what is that? Where do you have that from? Many large organizations use this kind of model to say, like, how can we think about the crisis? Because there is no model called COVID-19, and people are struggling when we don't have a model. This is actually what people use in terms of disaster and trauma management. So what it means is that you can see that all of us, systems, teams, organizations, go through what we call this sort of up and down curve there, from a pre-disaster, from when the impact, when it first hit, when we were all fighting back heroically in terms of this honeymoon period, for when it all came down, disillusionment, and we are now in this sort of phase of this reconstruction. And as you can see, there are sort of trigger moments. Now, so far, so good. I know that many of you are either people who actually live that, or who are also like quite familiar with it and saying, oh yeah, but Thomas, nothing new. We knew that. What I want to put your focus on is the following. Right at the bottom of the curve, there's something written, which is the timeline. The first initial period is usually on days and weeks. And I want to show on the bottom, on the right-hand side, the phase where we are now in the reconstruction. This is years, months to years. And this is, we're talking about mental health, mental well-being. I want to say the message, a simple message, this is there to stay. All of us, we need to be familiar with this is there to stay, no matter whether it's a little bit better or not. The impact of it will be there. So we better prepare, because all of us need to get into that. How do we deal with that in terms of mental well-being?
Yeah, so let me go to the next slide. These are some statistics here collected in Brazil in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on the mental health of the general population. So this data was collected this year, and you can see that the statistics are really quite, well, shocking. They're worrying. So in terms of anxiety levels, well, more than or almost 90% of people in Brazil have moderate to severe levels of anxiety. Depression, almost 70%. And again, this is really quite worrying. And how do we know where we are ourselves, where our team is in terms of our mental health, our well-being, and our stress? And you can also see here at the bottom even more severe issues, such as post-traumatic stress disorder is already quite high in Brazil because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And might it be because of the stress of the uncertainty, because of job loss, people dying around us? So it is really quite severe, and we need to do something for ourselves and our teams at work, in as Thomas said, because this is here to stay for a while. So we need to look after each other and after ourselves. Now, of course, many managers and other professionals find it quite hard to determine or to detect whether others are stressed. They don't feel really equipped. So that's why we want to introduce a tool here to you today that we developed. Before we talk about that, let me talk to you a little bit more about stress and how stress and performance are connected. Now, we always talk about stress as something negative. But we would say that stress is actually something positive, depending on the level of the stress, of course. So here on that curve, you can see that when stress levels are quite low, performance is also low. Why is that? Let me talk to you a little bit more about this. It's actually our reaction to the stress that makes it so detrimental for our mental health or well-being, not the stress in itself. So when stress is low, this is actually not very good for our performance because we're being under challenge, we're bored in a way, and that in itself can be quite stressful. Where we actually want to be is with slightly higher stress levels, so right here at the top of this curve, as you can see, because that means we are experiencing challenges that really match our skills, that stretch us a little bit. So this is kind of the spot where we thrive. So just enough stress to really get us going and for us to be able to perform in a really high manner. Of course, we have to be then quite careful, as you can see here on this slide, that we don't move across the tipping point, so where this curve slopes down. And this is where the stress becomes too much, the challenges that we're facing, the stress we're facing, we can't really cope with that because we don't have the right resources, we don't have the right support, it just doesn't match our skills, and that's where we start to feel exhausted, completely overwhelmed, which eventually can lead to more serious issues, just like a burnout, as we discussed. Now, if you have a piece of paper next to you, or if you could just take your screens, so where would you put yourself on that curve? Just take a moment to think about this right now. Where are you on the stress performance curve? Are you right at the top in the sweet spot? Are you close to this tipping point? And again, we would argue maybe for ourselves, it's easy or maybe not so easy to do, but particularly for others, it's probably quite difficult to tell where they are. So again, we've come up with a way to help you, to help all of us, to make that a little bit easier to determine where we and our teams are on that curve. So with that, I want to hand over to Thomas again, who will talk you through this approach in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. And I think it's fascinating to see this stress performance curve is known for a long time, but still we struggle on that. We might say, like, it's always easier to say there's a tipping point, but I realize my tipping point only when I've passed it. And then my wife would say, you passed it for a long, long time. You know, if you're like me, and then probably you have your better half telling you, yeah, you passed it a long time ago. Might it be this way? But there's a human nature. We fool ourselves by saying, oh, it's not me. However, we put ourselves in your mind. You meet in this current crisis, which is going on for quite some time, and which is an important thing in Brazil. You meet people. And how do we ask that question? Because normally, what do you say in Brazil when you ask the question, how are you doing? You're saying, tudo bem. Tudo bem. And that means like what it means. When I was in Brazil, amazed, because your nation, no matter what it is always, everything is going fine. But sometimes we're saying that, and sometimes we know that behind there, the body tells something else. So what we are arguing here is we need to have a simple and easy enough approach to say, how is the person really doing? If you're a manager, if you're looking after people, how are your people doing? And some of you are familiar, in medicine, in the military, there's something called triaging. So the triaging is a way to say who is the most urgent to address. That's in simple terms since Napoleon's time, actually what triaging is. Now, what is interesting, in all hospitals around the world, triaging is going on right now. to say like, who needs our help? What is not so much done, and that's basically what we're bringing here to the table, is the emotional triaging. How can we check in saying, how is it going? And what is in this emotional triaging? 3 steps, 3 simple steps. Checking in with your team, deep dive with the selected people, and then consider action. So I want to start you on of these 3 simple steps. What are these steps? And we want to run you through like, what should one consider? So checking in with the team, what does that really mean? Checking in with the team, I want to say each and every one of us, we need to do that. When we start a meeting, how is it going? And we're saying this, how's it going is just a colloquial way to say that. What's your energy level is, for instance, the way to do that. I'll give you a little bit later a little way how to do that. Be creative. Don't always ask the same thing. But it could be like, what is one constraint that you came across this last week? And you would be surprised to know people, when you ask them, they do talk about it, because the social distancing means like we need to talk even more and feel connected to the others. There could be also the way, what is one thing that gave you energy last week? So this is the way you pull them into something positively. However, the emotional check-in is the first step of the 3 steps in terms of our emotional triaging. Caroline, what's the next step then?
The next step is to take a bit more of a deep dive, as Thomas already said, is where you would have a conversation with a team member, so one-to-one, where you can then spend some time in the conversation to recognize or pay attention to some stress signs. Now, why did we call this stress APGAR? Might sound a bit like a strange term, but we are building our work here on the APGAR that is used for newborn babies. So Virginia APGAR developed this, a pediatrician. She developed this as a really rapid, quick test when you have a baby who's newborn, to tell, is the baby showing all of the vital signs? Is the breathing there? Is the heart beating okay? And so forth. And it's not a deep diagnostic. It's just a really quick check that the doctor or the midwife does to check, is there anything worrying here? Are there any warning flags that I need to pay attention to investigate a little bit further, or to indeed refer this newborn child on to a specialist? And so we use this as a template in a way, and say, well, can we actually do the same with stress? Can we come up with a framework that we can give a manager, another professional, or even coaches, that they can keep in mind when they're talking to a team member, to see, are there any warning flags, or are there particular areas that I can support this person a bit further to manage their stress in a healthy manner. And in fact, what Thomas and I, together with our colleagues at INSEAD, who developed this tool with us, what we did is we basically scanned the entire stress literature for factors and symptoms of stress, and indeed we could fit them in those 5 areas. So let me talk you through those briefly. I don't want to go into too much detail here. We could spend, many hours on explaining this tool in detail. If you are interested, do get in touch with us, and we're happy to tell you a little bit more about the specific stress APGAR tool that helps you in a way decode the signs of stress. So the first area is appearance, so the physical aspect. So by just looking at someone's energy levels, we already talked about that there might be decreasing over time, or actually also that they're gaining weight. definitely during lockdown here in the UK, I have gained lots of weight. Or again, complaints about not being able to sleep or sleeping much more. These are signs of stress. Performance, so that's the mental dimension of stress. You can see here, if you have someone who's usually performing really well, suddenly finding it hard to finish things by the deadline, or actually people who are going into overdrive, and are seeming a lot busier than usual. These again are indicators of stress, so that the person might be struggling with increasing negative levels of stress. In terms of this spiritual aspect and how stress manifests itself here, is to what extent someone, and you remember that from the curve earlier, feels over or under challenged, or just feels maybe really a less of purpose and meaning of what they do. And all of these things you can pick up in a conversation. So you don't need to ask, are you stressed? You don't even need to ask, are you sleeping at all very well, or do you have a sense of purpose? These are things you can pick up in a conversation, and you can look at the person even virtually and see that they're increasingly looking tired, or again in the second area, that increasingly you can see that they're making more mistakes than usual, or that they're maybe just complaining about that they just find it hard to show up for work because it's all becoming a little bit tedious or meaningless. Now, the fourth area is affect control, so our emotions, and these are actually a very good way of telling whether someone is stressed. It really comes through in our ability how we manage our emotions, of course, at work and at home. So emotional outbursts are typically a sign of severe stress in a way. And last but not least, the last area of relationships, so that's the social dimension of stress, is also a good indicator to see whether someone is getting increasingly stressed, because people who have quite high negative levels of stress withdraw themselves from others, or find it hard to manage their relationships in a positive manner, maybe because of area 4, right? Because of those emotional outbursts. And of course, you can also check here whether there is a good support network in place, because what these areas also tell you, and Thomas will come to that in a moment, is kind of what is the weak link in a way for this person in terms of their stress management and performance. So if you can see that just in the physical area, they're finding it quite difficult, so you can think about how you can support that individual there. Or if you're realizing actually this person doesn't have that many people around them, that many friends or colleagues or family that can support them, well, that's probably a weak link then. So when times get tough, that will really lack, and that might mean that they're experiencing much more stress when they're facing a particular challenge than someone else who has a really good support network in place. So again, I don't want to talk about this in too much detail here. If you want to know a little bit more about the specific stress UpGuard tool and all of the different signs and how to use this tool in a conversation, do get in touch with us. And I'll hand back over to Thomas now to talk you through step number 3 of our emotional triaging approach.
Yeah. If we just stay for a little moment still, I just want to say for some of you, yes, we went there very quick. Now, just to say, the stress UpGuard, the UpGuard for babies is used worldwide. It's easy enough, but it's reliable. It's the same sort of logic what we're doing there. You can be trained on that, and you can become trained. You can use it, but it's a simple way to assess it. And that's where we want to say, we want to bring that to people who actually deal with people. You all meet people who might show some sign of stress. So at the same time, we want to give you a tool to be mindful and to be able to pick it up. At the same time, we want to say, like, we don't want to stop there, because otherwise we are stressed because I see somebody stressed. So there's a little assessment that can be done, but one need to be trained there for that one a little bit. But the mental model behind this is accessible and freely accessible to everybody. We've even produced and written little blogs to that, where we can get you in touch, where it could be very interesting for you to look into, getting a little bit more on that. How can I really pragmatically use that? So we want to stay on that pragmatic side by now saying, stress Abwehr was the number 2, was this sort of deep dive, as Caroline nicely described that. We now want to go to the third part, is once we've seen, once we were going on an individual level further, now we need to see, like, how is it in terms of what sort of action to consider. And here for you as managers, as people looking after people, we want to say, we put that into 3 categories. And 3 categories is almost like saying, like, that sticks in our mind, and that also nicely describes what that is. So the first category is, first of all, you're not jumping in doing something, but you consider, well, is there a support network? And if there's a support network to a person, you want to say, like, use this one, which is colleagues and friends. Some people call that the vitamin B, the vitamin F in terms of family. So ask colleagues and friends to help them, and then establish healthy rituals. What does it mean? Well, doing some sports, if the sports side, the physical side is, doing some sort of other things if the mental side, getting your handle on sleep, for example, as well. So this is the first thing in terms of, you might want to say, like, the most superficial level. Now, then you can say, if you're going one step further, what you should do then as well is, the next level would be coaching. And coaching here, I want to say, like, it's challenge and support. Challenge and support. So we sometimes know the people that we know, and we see what they're actually going through, and we know the pattern. And sometimes we're saying, oh, no, I don't want to add you yet more stress. So sometimes as a good friend of mine, you need to challenge me, but you need to also support me. Identify certain patterns and then challenge them. And then create reflective structures. These reflective structures, it goes back to what we're saying. Social distancing and stress means we need even people more closely by. And what that actually refers to is, you might be familiar in terms of people, sort of peer groups. And that is being done by chronic diseases, but it's also done very successfully, for example, the medical profession. Me as a medical doctor, I need to speak to other medical doctors, actually to have this peer supervision. We replaced here the term peer supervision by create reflective structures. We want to demystify that. You don't need to be a psychologist, medical doctor, and so on to actually do that. We want to encourage you, do your own little experience with that. And then comes to the third level. We all know that certain people, certain cases, we might want to say as well, in organizations, we need to be aware. It's not like good enough if somebody who is hardly trained for that do that, but we need to also somehow say there need to be a referral to either HR, a coach, psychologist, and doctor. But this is really when you're saying, wow, this is too difficult, we need to go further there. And so I'm just, and in this way, we sometimes want to say, like, well, going too quickly sometimes to say, like, oh yeah, great, I bring you to HR, could be actually counterproductive, because the moment when you bring somebody to HR, and here's no offense against any HR sitting here in this virtual room, sometimes people fear that because there's still something of the taboo. when HR thinks, I can't stand the heat, I will be out of my job. And then it increases even like the stress level. So we're saying 3 steps. Come back to that. First one is leveraging the support network. Then it's coaching and challenging and support. The third one is just in case, if it's too far out, we need to also do the referral to other professionals. And that brings me back to saying, like, we wanted to give you, wait for a little moment for the next slide, but we wanted to give you a little example, very concrete example. And we're happy if you want to copy that, and if you want to take a photo in a moment of that next slide or so. We wanted to give you a way, how can you connect? How can you do this sort of emotional check-in in a slightly different way? And then afterwards, we wanted to make some time as well that the audience can ask a little bit. Yeah. So we wanted to give some time. We make on purpose. We said we do a shorter talk because we were encouraged by saying, like, there should be some time for Q&As. Yeah. So you heard us on saying, like, checking in is important. You probably do that. Some of you do run little cafes where you're saying, like, hey, just a chit chat. We're together, we're talking to each other, but there's no agenda. Now we want to do here. So first message is, it's important. And second message is, you can do that. You must do that sometimes in various ways. So always have a repertoire of different things, how you can do it. Most people are saying, oh, how's your energy from 1 to 10? That's the most classical thing. But at the same time, it's very numeric. We want to show you here now the way that, how you do that. And then we want you to, the second one, to do that. So the importance of checking in, how do you feel today, is the kind of the checking in question. And then share one thing that gives you energy in the crisis. And here, well, we haven't developed that, but we use that. You might have an idea where that comes from, but you also see that this is widely used, and we call it the sheep scale. How do you feel today? Now, what I want you to do today, the way I use that, sometimes with executives, and believe it or not, they love it. They love it, and I can tell you why. Because it is in a different way. It just gets a different part of your brain, not just this cognitive, what is it from 1 to 10, but it makes me laugh when I'm saying, hey, the number 3 really looks cool. I feel like number 3 today. Perhaps I really feel like number 3 today. A couple of days I used them, and I went then in a small group when we did exactly as we're pointing it out here. So how do you feel today, and what is one thing that gives you energy? And you know what the people said? The people saying, I'm feeling like 4 today. I'm feeling like 4 today. Now, my dear colleagues, Caroline and Claire, get yourself prepared, because we do take the same medicine as we give to the people listening here. And so I will ask you in a moment the same question, but I will ask all of you, look at these 9 different sheeps, yeah? Whether you like sheeps or not, look at it and ask yourself the question. It's not early morning at your end, it's sort of after 10 and so on. So, but how do you approach the day? How do you feel today? And write down the number of the sheep, and you can take a photo of that if you want with your mobile phone, with your cell phone. And then I want you to share one thing that gives you energy. Now, since we're all sitting here somewhere else, we can't do that together. I want you to find a person somewhere after this session and do exactly that. You're telling them, hey, have you heard about the sheep scale? And I feel like sheep number 4. You can go on your cell phone and you can find that easily on the net if you want. But share this one thing that gives you energy in the crisis. Now, since I'm saying we're doing what we're doing, what we're asking you, we're doing also to ourselves. Caroline, can I ask you, what's the sheep that represents how you feel today? And what is one thing that gives you energy?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Thomas. Well, I thought about this now while we were talking or putting me on the spot. I think today I feel like number 5. It's cold and gray here. I would love to be in Brazil where the sun is shining, where it's summer, not winter right now. I'm a little bit tired from lots of teaching, but at the same time I feel cozy. I feel we're in this virtual room together talking about something that is close to all of our hearts. So yeah, that's how I feel. And one thing that gives me energy in the crisis, well, I have to say, if we go back to the stress Apgar scale, it is number 5. It is my family around me. Even though we can only connect virtually, that's what gives me energy. Really reconnecting much more than we used to before the crisis. So I also reconnected with good friends of mine that I had not been in touch with in years, and we are now regularly in touch, and that has really given me a boost of energy. So that's me, number 5.
Good. Claire, do you want to also come on the board, or do you want me to?
No, I want to hear what Claire.
Let me share. Yeah, I'd love to share quickly. And then there's some great questions from the audience as well. So let's save some time for those. I would say I feel like number 7. I have a lot on at the moment, so I'm grateful to have that wall next to me to kind of prop me up. So all the support that I have around me that's keeping me propped up and keeping me on the right track. And one thing that gives me energy might sound strange, but I'm very introvert, and I've really rediscovered reading during the crisis. So having a pause actually for me to just read and be totally engrossed in some kind of fantasy, I feel much more energized afterwards. I've taken that break and done some reading. So that would be me. There's a great question here from the audience.
Exactly.
But maybe Caroline Thomas,
we go to these questions now. And then I quickly do also like myself.
Yeah,
so
where
I
are
want
you
to do that as well.
Where are you?
So
go on,
I feel like today like number 1. I feel like number 1 and saying like, well, there are so many people putting certain remarks and requests there, and even like they're going in overdrive and saying here, this and that. And I sometimes feel I want to say like, I feel like this today. Now, at the same time, what gives me energy, as all of us, we spend more time at home, and sort of the ritual in the morning to have my kids and then to bring them to school. I do that now so regularly, and that gives me energy to listen to them. I might want to say like, I've done that before, but it's in a different way. So the morning ride to school, the evening ride from school gives me energy. I'm looking forward to that this evening. So we want to do now a little bit of Q&A. We're coming to the end of it.
Yeah, there's a great question here. There's a risk that the manager might feel 100% responsible and fall into a rescue syndrome. So Caroline Thomas, some tips. How can the manager know what the limit
Very good.
of his or her
I can perhaps
role
take
is?
this one first, because since I'm a medical professional, we have also this sort of rescuer risk sometimes in the medical profession. First thing is to say to the person who asked the question, it's a great question, check in with yourself and check in, are you safe to approach? So I want to say like, I need to first check in with me before I can check in with the others, and then involve other people. So we set like, use support network for them, use support network for you. And then I want to say like, time limit is the last point. Make it with a time limit. Do not become the crutch of your employee or of somebody you're looking after, because people are there to actually come back on board, but you cannot carry them for the rest of their life. Let's go for quickly through other questions perhaps then.
Thank you, folks. Yeah, great tips. How or what could I do in order to become confident in using the APGAR, the protocol that you just shared?
Caroline, do you want me to take that, you?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to say, we said the word demystify. Of course, I might say, no, wait, sign up for our courses and come and we train you, and only then. And you know what? I'm saying exactly the opposite. You can do that, you can reach out and so on, and we want to give you more help, but I'm saying is get your own, I don't want to say like hands dirty, but get your hands into it, because I think you've got in yourself a little intuition. You feel that, and the APGAR is just putting into words what you intuitively feel. It's not rocket science, and I want to say use that and see where it doesn't work, and then we can make that better. Because this is also like the way we use the real APGAR. There's so many different ways, but people around in Brazil, in the smallest hospital in Brazil, they do an APGAR score. And that's the kind of, we want to use that, make that like the internet makes things free, and we want to make that for free and use it, and come back and tell us about where you struggle with it.
Thank you, Thomas. And I know you and Caroline have written a great article about the APGAR, so we'll share that with you all so that you have that as a reference with some pointers and questions within it. There's also a question about where does the data come from that Caroline shared. So we'll also share the link to that so that you have that as a reference in case that is useful.
Exactly. Both are in there. There's an HBR blog that we've written. There's also like a more recent one, which is basically on the crisis from the INSEAD Knowledge, this little business school somewhere in France. And then yes, indeed, I think I've just seen that was popping up. Toya put also like the reference about the article in there. Fantastic.
Yeah. Everything is in the chat, so you should have everything there.
Yeah, and if you're interested in the science behind all of this, we've also published an academic journal article, and happy to send that to you when you reach out. And maybe also just to follow on again from what Thomas said earlier, you know, we all know in a way that when someone else is where it's not quite right, and maybe also use the stress APGAR for yourself. And I think that's Thomas, isn't it? That's what we also realized. I mean, we're always talking about how do we detect a stress in others, but to also really kind of get in touch with yourself a little bit more and say, well, how can I tell that I'm close to that tipping point, and not actually when I'm, you know, across the tipping point already. What is the one or the two things, you know, that always come up when I'm too close to the tipping point? And I know for me, it's when I say, oh, I'm way too exhausted to do any exercise. And when I start actually going into overdrive with my work, I now know, okay, actually, it's not because I'm super efficient. It is maybe because it's all getting a little bit too much.
And here I might want to say, like, link to that one. Probably we all know a person who's close to us can be the person who picks that up. We only pick that up a little bit further down the line. I told you about my wonderful Spanish wife. She tells me sometimes, she's very to the point and saying like, no, Thomas, come on, you can't fool anybody else. You can fool everybody else, but you cannot fool me. So I want to say, like, listen to your better half and check in with them. Family and friends, we call that the vitamin F or vitamin F.
Thank you. Thank you both for the very pragmatic insights. I know personally, working with my own team, it can be hard to know where to start. And what I really love about what you've given us is something very practical and something that we can do right away, whether that be on ourselves or people that we work with. So maybe just in closing, I mentioned earlier about the pandemic has fast-tracked some things that we already saw happening within organizations. And I think one of those is that mental health and mental well-being is rightly being driven up the strategic agenda, and is something that we're all now paying more attention to. At KDVI, our mission has always been to create these healthy performing organizations. And now more than ever, we think it's important to put the human back into the heart of organizations. As we said, we've shared the links with you, but do reach out if you'd like any more information. And maybe just to close, I know when I speak to people about mental health, trying to change a whole team or a whole culture or a whole organization can seem impossible. So I just want to give a little reminder that even the smallest things can make a difference by sharing a parable with you. It's called the parable of the starfish. Once upon a time, there was an old man who used to go to the ocean for exercise. One day, he was walking along a beach that was littered with thousands of starfish that had been washed ashore by the high tide. As he walked, he came upon a young boy who was eagerly throwing the starfish back into the ocean, one by one. Puzzled, the man looked at the boy and asked what he was doing. The young boy paused, looked up and replied, "I'm throwing starfish into the ocean. The tide has washed them up onto the beach and they can't return to the sea by themselves. When the sun gets high, they'll die unless I throw them back into the water." The old man replied, "But there must be tens of thousands of starfish on this beach. I'm afraid you won't really be able to make much of a difference." And the boy bent down, picked up yet another starfish and threw it as far as he could into the ocean. And then he turned, smiled and said, "Well, I made a difference to that one." Thank you for joining us today. I pass back to Toya.
Thank you. Toya, I think you're still on mute.
I think that actually Santa Claus was very generous with me. You know, I couldn't have... Sorry, I'm speaking. Eu acho que o Papai Noel não poderia ter sido tão generoso comigo. É um sonho que torna-se realidade, poder trazer para o Brasil esse trabalho tão significante, tão impactante. Ontem nós falamos no painel das 9 com o Paulo Kakinoff, com a Ana Paula Bogos, do RAP, e com o Dr. Eliezer, do Hospital Albert Einstein, a importância desses pequenos atos. E o quão é importante a gente saber que a boa vontade, às vezes, não basta. É importante ter um pouco de técnica por trás. Eu acho que a beleza dessa ferramenta é que cada gestor pode usá-la do seu próprio jeito, do seu próprio estilo. Mesmo dentro do Brasil, a gente também tem algumas diferenças culturais, que eu acho que essa ferramenta também consegue endereçar. E, por último, eu queria terminar com uma fala do Dr. Eliezer, que é o médico do Einstein, que esteve conosco ontem, que é responsável por todas as unidades do Einstein, que não estão no Morumbi. Para quem é de fora de São Paulo, o Einstein é um hospital muito grande, então ele lida com todos os centros diagnósticos, todas as parcerias que o Einstein tem com a prefeitura, então também está envolvido com a saúde pública. E ele fez ontem um ato falho. Em vez de falar home office, né? Em vez de ele falar home office, que é a palavra que a gente tem mais falado, ele usou a palavra home care. Para quem sabe, home care é quando você cuida de um paciente que deveria estar no hospital ou em casa. E eu achei de uma beleza tão grande que eu acho que inconscientemente ele trocou home office por home care. E eu acho que fica muito claro a importância desse momento de nós estarmos conectados com as nossas famílias, né? E home care significa cuidar do lar. E eu ainda gostaria de ir adiante e que vocês pensem no dia a dia de vocês, nos pequenos contatos, nas intervenções do dia a dia, como é que a gente pode criar organizações onde a gente faça home office, mas que a gente também possa fazer office care, ou seja, como é que a gente pode cuidar das pessoas antes de que elas caiam do navio e se afoguem. Então, queria agradecer muito e vamos construir aí organizações e relações de trabalho onde as pessoas cuidam umas das outras de uma forma responsável e de uma forma efetiva e, logicamente, com o nosso carinho e afeto brasileiro. Muito obrigada, Claire, Thomas e Caroline. Foi um presente para todos nós e espero que vocês leiam esse artigo da Harvard Business Review que eles escreveram, a gente colocou no chat, também colocamos no chat o link para o artigo do Brasil, que é muito importante a gente ter dados que comprovem, logicamente, a importância desse assunto tão relevante. Queria convidar vocês para os painéis que vão acontecer também hoje às 5, às 6 e às 7. Toda a programação está no site da Exame. Muito obrigada e um bom dia para vocês. Tschüss!